Hello, dear students. Today, we're going to start a new chapter from your history textbook. Chapter number 7, Ashoka, the Emperor who gave up war. Since we are going to learn about Ashoka, let us first see the empire he belonged to. Let us know more about the empire. We've been learning about kingdoms in our previous chapters, but what do we know about an empire? Well, an empire is an aggregate of many separate states or territories under a supreme ruler or an emperor. It is a very vast land. Then, how is an empire different from a kingdom? Empires are larger than kingdoms. Therefore, to manage such big empires, emperors need more resources than the kings. Bigger armies are required to protect the empire. Furthermore, a large number of officials are required to collect taxes. Therefore, an empire is much larger and much more massive than a kingdom. One such empire existed 2300 years ago in this Indian subcontinent. This empire was known as the Mauryan Empire. Mauryan Empire was founded by Chandragupta Maurya. It is one of the most famous widespread empires in the history. Chandragupta Maurya was supported by a very wise man named Chanakya. Chandragupta Maurya in expanding the Mauryan Empire. Chanakya is at times also called Kautilya. He wrote a very important book called Arthashastra. He mentioned a lot of his important and valuable ideas, and it is still now identified as one of the most important and prominent books for studying about politics and its strategies. You can see how vast the empire was. It stretched from the north to the south, from east to the west. This massive land consisted of many important cities and villages. Patliputra, Taxila, Ujjain, Tosali, and Swarnagiri were considered to be the most prominent cities in this empire. Merchants, craftspersons, and laborers lived in these cities. The cities were considered important for administration. For example, Taxila was considered to be the gateway to the northwest and central India. Ujjain, in the same way, laid on route from north to the south India. Along with the cities, the empire consisted of many villages as well. Farmers and herders lived in the villages. In the forested areas, people still gathered forest produce and hunted animals. The Mauryan Empire, as we know, was very large. So, naturally, people of different regions lived in this empire. Diversity prevailed. People spoke different languages, ate different kinds of food, and wore different kinds of clothes. It is a perfect example for unity in diversity. Ruling such a vast region was not an easy task. The different regions had to be administered differently. For example, Patliputra was directly under the control of the ruler, and the other areas of the empire were governed through provincial capitals like Taxila and Ujjain. Taxila and Ujjain were considered to be the provincial capitals because of their locations. As I have mentioned before, they were the gateways to the different parts of the region. The ruling in Patliputra was governed by the ruler itself. The officials were appointed to collect taxes from people who lived in the area. The officials could also punish those who disobeyed the ruler's orders. For the services they provided, the officials were given salaries. The ruling of the state involved help from others as well. For example, messengers played an important role in the communication of such a large empire. Spies were required to report any suspicious activity and for keeping a check on the security to the ruler. The members of the royal family and senior ministers also helped the emperor in the administration and overall supervision of the empire. The areas other than Patliputra under the ruler's rule were administered from the provincial capitals. Though these provincial capitals were far away from Patliputra, the control from Patliputra still existed. For this, royal princes were sent as governors to these provincial capitals. Therefore, sons of the royal family ensured a certain control of the administration in these areas. Even though these areas were under the control of the ruler, the customs and traditions were not intervened in. The areas near Patliputra, Ujjain, and Taxila were very well managed, but a vast area of land still remained. The Mauryans tried very well to control these vast regions. They managed these regions through controlling the roads and rivers which were used for transportation. The resources found in these particular areas were collected as taxes and tributes. For example, as explained in the Arthashastra, the northwest was important for blankets, and the south was important for gold and precious stones. So we saw that they collected tributes and taxes. What are tributes and taxes? Aren't they the same thing? No, they are not. Taxes are collected regularly. What had to be paid, they were defined. When it had to be paid, and how much it had to be paid were all defined with the taxes. Tribute, on the other hand, was given as and when possible. The outline of what had to be paid, when it had to be paid, and how much had to be paid were not defined in the tributes. A variety of things were given as tributes, more or less willingly, whereas the taxes were compulsory. Other than the cities and villages, a vast area of forested land belonged to the empire. The emperor's rule here was not very prominent, but the people living in these areas were expected to give forest produce as taxes or tribute. They were required to provide elephants, timber, honey, and wax, which were used for their different purposes. Other than the information that we get from Arthashastra, we have another true detailed account of an ambassador that was sent by a Greek ruler to the court of Chandragupta Maurya to know more about the Mauryan Empire. The ambassador was called Megasthenes, who was sent by Seleucus Nicator, a Greek ruler of the West Asia. We can draw conclusions from it. As the guest of the court, he was very observant of the emperor and his lifestyle. He pointed out in his account that the celebration of the emperor's public appearance was very well organized. It was celebrated with grand royal processions. He was carried in a golden palanquin. Guards rode elephants decorated with gold and silver, which also give an account of a very rich empire. And it also gives a hint that the show of extravagance was very enjoyed by the people. Other than the luxurious lifestyle, the emperor took many measures for his own protection. As Megasthenes noted that the king was normally surrounded by armed men and women. He was afraid that someone may try to kill him. Servants to taste the food right before he ate. He never slept in the same bedroom for 2 nights. These were some of the main observations made by Megasthenes about the ruler Chandragupta Maurya at that time. Along with his observation about the emperor, Megasthenes paints a picture of the then Patliputra and modern-day Patna. He described it as a very beautiful city. He describes the fortification of the city, which had 570 towers and 64 gates. He commented on the strong, well-built houses which were made of wood and mud brick. He complimented the palace to be beautiful and having impressive craftsmanship on it. He also pointed out the proper city planning that was done. So, with this, we come to the end of this video. In this video, we learned about Chandragupta Maurya, kingdom, capital cities, ruling of the modern empire, taxes and tributes, Megasthenes and Chanakya. In the next video, we'll learn more about Ashoka, the Kalinga War, Ashoka's Dhamma, sculptures and scripts, and the Great Wall of China.